Okay, wonderful to see everybody here. Nice crowd. All right, so it's already 2 o'clock. So it is a great honor, a great blessing, a great privilege to have Vaisesika Das to come back here. I was really, I asked him, hey, a lot of times we have our people that speak, that we interview on Sunday, we bring them back and have them do some during the week for the Patreon members. And, he's a very busy person with a lot of responsibilities, and I was almost hesitant to ask, but I was just so hopeful that he could for all for myself and all the audience. So I sprang the question on him, and he said, "Oh, I'd be happy to." So but we're really grateful for you giving us this time, Vaishesh Prabhu. So welcome, first of all.
Thank you so much, Kaustuba. Yeah, I was eager to get back because the audience here is so sweet. I couldn't resist coming back. And anything that you're doing, I'm interested in.
Well, that's just your being super kind to me, but I'm interested in serving you any way I can, Prabhu. So today, Vaisesika Prabhu is going to be speaking on tapping the fourth dimension, the realm of bliss, and this should be that fourth dimension. We'll find out more about, but it's the realm beyond the mind, the realm beyond the senses. I'm looking. The title sounds really, I don't know, otherworldly, but I know that his presentations always come on a real practical level. And so I'm looking forward to the information. And one way that Vaisesika Prabhu works a lot is he likes to occasionally pause and get reflections or questions from the audience. So he's informed me that he will be doing that throughout. So if any of you have questions, please feel free to put them up on the chat board. We may not be able to get to all of them, but we'll take some of them. Okay? And is there anything else I should mention before we start?
No, okay. I don't think so. I think it's fine.
Oh, yeah. Actually, it'll be Mara that'll be taking those questions, right? During those questions. Okay. All right. So, Prabhu, we're all ears. We're on the edge of our seats. We're eager to hear what you have to share today.
Thank you so much, Kaustuba. First, I offer my respects to my spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada, and to all of you in the audience today who fellow travelers on this beautiful path of bhakti. Thank you so much for being here. I'm exhilarated just to be in your presence. And let's just for a moment take time to introspect as we start off, because as we're moving about the world, being compelled to go from one thing to the next, sometimes we forget about our inner life, even though we're practitioners. And to come back to that, even momentarily, helps us to enter into the subject matter today, which will be entering into a higher realm, or at least channeling that realm. So if you would, wherever you're situated, if you can sit up just a tiny bit straighter than you were a second ago, and close your eyes so that you can shut out the external environment and start looking inwardly. When you sit up straighter, then it makes the mind ready. There's something about it, just like when you're at an interview. If you sit up straight, the person will think, oh, he or she is listening. So similarly, your mind takes notice that you're sitting straight. You can also think that you're on a launching pad like a rocket, sitting straight, ready to go to the fourth dimension. So now as you're sitting a little bit straighter and your eyes are closed, bring your focus to your breath, which is a great relief, because the breath is sustaining us all day long, and hardly do we get a chance throughout the day to even notice it. But as you breathe, try to give some gratitude and remember that it's sustaining every cell in your body. And bring your awareness to your breath. It's our choice at every moment where to place our awareness. And you can mentally, as you exhale, say out, and mentally say in as you inhale, just to keep your awareness on your breath and relax, but remain alert. Don't become sleepy. Stay alert, but relaxed, and breathe. For a moment, just allow yourself to be instead of doing. We're human beings, not human doings. Be satisfied that you exist. It's enough, at least for now. And now as you're breathing, with the mind alert, but body relaxed, bring your awareness to your heart region, the area of emotion, the seat of consciousness. And here we're trying an experiment to become shakshva, which means a witness, in the state of witnesshood. So for a moment, notice that you're the one that's noticing. You're the one who's just noticed your breath. You're the one who moved your attention to the area of the heart. And now observe and see what kind of energies are moving through your mind space. Just watch them. And remain aware that you're the witness. For a moment, bring your attention to your feet. Feel your feet. A second ago, you didn't feel them, but you have the choice to move your awareness to your feet and notice how easily you can move your attention from one place to the next. Now transfer it to your hands. Maybe you'll feel the pulse, blood coursing through. Objectify your hands and notice there are some hands and I'm watching them. Bring your awareness back to the heart and notice the thought energy moving through your mind space, the chitta. And notice that it's moving through like clouds and you're observing. And now take one moment to become aware that you exist. Become aware of your own awareness. You're a non-neural, non-chemical, non-material particle that's the observer with the power to place your attention wherever you wish. And where your attention goes, your energy flows. And breathe. Bring your attention back to your breath. And rub your palms together to make some friction and bring your awareness back to your external body. And open your eyes, and we'll come back into this virtual Zoom room. So this is a way in which Prabhupada mentions in the Srimad Bhagavatam, one can introspect and become aware that one exists. One of the ways in which I forget about my identity is because I become identified with everything that's in the external world, and I forget that I'm the one observing it. So one of the ways that I always am amazed at this process, first of all, that it's so simple, it's right there all the time. And the other is how absorbed how easy it is to get absorbed in the outer world and to identify with it. So one of the ways this practice helps is that it helps to bring us to this position of sakshitva. Everyone please say sakshitva, which means to be a witness. And from that position, there's a perspective. You get a different perspective. And I'll give you an example of perspective. And that is, there are many cars in the world, but one of them may be my car. A car is a car. It's just a combination of materials, but one of them might be my car. And what is the difference between a car and my car? It's a matter of perspective. So on one side, let's say I'm sitting quietly reading a book in my house, and I hear somebody careening around the corner, and I hear that my car outside got hit. And how do I feel when that happens? Koshtuba, what do you think will happen to me?
To you, I think you would be fine. But if for me,
No.
I think I might feel fear and a blend of fear, anxiety, and perhaps anger.
What would be the
These
physical
kind of
symptoms,
emotions.
do you think?
Probably increased heart rate. I don't. Otherwise, physically, I don't know. My breathing rate would probably
Perspiration,
increase. Yeah,
pulse will
perspiration.
go up.
Yeah.
A mind will start to spin more. I wonder if I extended my insurance. And so they go outside, and now I look outside the window, and it wasn't my car after all. My neighbor's name is Eric, and it was Eric's car, not mine. So now how do I feel?
Well, you would feel greater sympathy for your neighbor, but I would feel great relief that it was not my car, but that it was somebody else's car.
Yeah, so oftentimes when something happens, for instance, let's just say something does happen to your car, and then how do we become philosophical about it? We rise to a higher perspective. And what's a phrase that people say when their car got hit and they want to become aloof from it? It's just a car. It's just a car. And so we can change our perspective from one side to the next. At one point, it's my car, another car. It's just a car. It's still, okay, it was my car that got hit, but now I change my perspective. I say, it's just a car. So in Shakshitva, I mean, this is mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita, Naiva kinchit karomiti yukto manyeta tatvavit. There's a long verse, which I won't recite the whole verse, but in which Krishna says that a person who's developing higher consciousness, awareness of identity, begins to objectify the world and what's in the world. Well, my body's in the world. It's part of the world, and so is my mind. So there's an advantage to that as one develops such a perspective, that one can become more aware of one's real identity and have an enlightened engagement with the world. So the mind flows in two ways. One's towards upliftment, and the other one's towards sense objects. And the reason I flow towards the world and become attached to it and I become confounded by it is because of my identification with it as mine. And this is one of this meditation of introspection and consideration, discrimination between myself and the body and the mind, the difference between the two, helps to develop this kind of perspective. So just a little catalog of the world as described from the Srimad Bhagavatam. And Srimad Bhagavatam describes how all the things of the world that we see are, and they're evolutes. They emerge from one single substance. The original substance is called Prakriti. It's an undifferentiated substance that's in complete equilibrium. And then when that equilibrium becomes disturbed, there's a change and various manifestations emerge or evolve from that. And I'll give you an example that we can probably all relate to, and that is with the various aspects of water. Water exists in three primary states. One is gaseous, another is liquid, and the other solid. So there's the ocean, which is in liquid form, and then it evaporates. And then, of course, from trees and the surface of the earth, there's also transpiration. The water goes into a gaseous form, floats into the sky. And then from clouds, when the clouds get compressed, then there's precipitation, and then it becomes liquid again. And when it gets cold, because of the environment, then it becomes solid. So the way that the Bhagavatam describes the world around us is that it's manifesting various conditions or phases according to the movements of the energy in the material world. They're all coming from one substance, but they manifest in various forms. And all of the elements we see around us in the world that are changing are the same in our body. We're a microcosm of the universe. Our bodies and minds have the same elements that are there within the entire universe, but we are different. We're different from those elements. We're different from the universe. We have a separate identity, and we're an energy that's categorically different from the world. So I'm pointing this out because starting with identity is very important. I'm going to say a few more things about this and then take some reflections. But one of the ways in which the body evolves is that it has a subtle and gross element. So the gross element are the earth, water, fire, air, and then there's ether, mind, intelligence, and ego. So you can compare this to software and hardware on a computer. The hardware is the hardscape of the computer, and then you have the software that runs it. So we also have those two elements. And one of the first evolutes I mentioned in the universe that comes out is called Mahat Tattva. And it also is the same element that's within us as what's called Chitta. I know this sounds very technical, but it'll become more practical in a minute. The Chitta is an aggregate of the subtle elements that we sometimes call mind. And so we have a psychological body, which is our subtle body. And this is the topic of, for instance, the Yoga Sutras, and in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna talks a little bit in a generalized way about the subtleties of the mind and how it works, and how it can hinder us or it can help us. So the practice that I'm going to talk about today, and give three distinct practices that anyone can employ in their daily life, helps us to make the mind our friend. So a little bit more about the mind and our psychological body, and that is, there are ways in which the mind becomes contracted and it becomes overburdened with impressions, and there are movements in the mind that become a disturbance to us. These are called vrittis. So if you imagine a very still pond where you can look and see the bottom of the pond, and you can see all the elements, like all the rocks and stones, you could actually count them. The mind, when it's still in a state of equilibrium and balanced, reveals to us our higher nature. And we don't have this entanglement with the world at that point. But when it becomes disturbed by the vrittis or the movements on the mind, it's like wind on the top of the lake through which we can't see anything because everything becomes obscured at the bottom. So the various ways in which the mind becomes disturbed are cataloged. Maybe I won't go into all the details of them right now, but I'll especially go into one of them that's called ahankara. And out of a list of 5, what Patanjali calls kleshas, or ways in which we suffer through the mind, he lists accepting the impermanent to be permanent, accepting the impure to be pure, accepting pain to be happiness, accepting the non-self to be the self, and accepting the power of the seer as equal to the seen. So in other words, that example I gave with that's a car, my car, and the way I identify myself as being part of this world instead of the witness of it is one of the ways that I suffer. And so there are also various states of mind. He describes how the mind is changing, and it's going from dull to wandering to distracted. And then the 2 states in which one can actually have some insight are pointed and restrained. So the practices that I'll talk about today, through which one can still the mind and also rewrite many of the impressions that are in the mind. And let me just say something about that for a second. That is that the mind is a very subtle substance, and it picks up from the outside world what's like a photographic image of all of the things that we see, hear, and feel in the world, and not just in this life, but also in many previous lives. So if you imagine an iPhone or a smartphone of some kind on camera mode, pointing out to the world, you take a snap, and then the information comes in and it solidifies on the screen. And then you see the image of what was there. So our minds, or our chitta, that's very subtle substance, records what comes into it from the outside world, and then it leaves an impression there that stays. So it's like one of those clouds that stores information that we know about. You have to pay for the cloud, right? And ours stores unlimited information. And so when the chitta has many, many of these impressions, you'll notice them in the form of the ways in which we're compelled to move in certain ways. Imagine on a wet beach, if you walk over it many, many times, you look behind you and you'll see footprints, more and more footprints. So the more that the mind becomes overburdened with these kinds of impressions from the world and becomes clogged with those, the more dense and dark the chitta becomes. So the process of meditation, Cheto Darpana Marjanam, is meant to clear the chitta so we can actually see our higher self and understand who we are. And let me just see if there's any reflections or any questions that you want to ask before I move on to some of the next parts.
Yeah, there's a question from Nancy Rothman regarding the meditation in the beginning. She said, I found my breath getting shorter, almost with fear, when I was asked to be the observer. Is this common at first? I was almost afraid to let go.
Yes, it's fairly common, because it's actually startling to realize that we're sitting here watching the world. Oftentimes, I'm just carried away by what's called my life situation. So when I see there's a difference between my life that's me and my life situation, then it can be a little bit startling. Just as I mentioned the other day, when we were doing just a very brief meditation about sitting underneath a tree, which is called a Kalpavriksha tree that can fulfill all your desires. And they say, what do you want? And then there tends to be a kind of a panic. What do I want? Who am I anyway? one of the states of mind is distraction. Staying constantly in distraction means I don't really think of myself. I don't confront my existential situation, and I'm not giving any attention to it. There's no awareness of it. But when I do, then it can be a little startling. It can at first be a little bit discomforting, but that will be short-lived. What else, Mara?
Someone else asked, Steve DeSimone asks, why are the negative impressions so much easier to access than the positive ones?
Well, actually, it's mentioned in the Yoga Sutras that yogis who are particularly concerned with these impressions that are called samskars, they leave impressions on the mind, and later on, these are latent impressions that under certain conditions, they come back to life. That's why you might notice, and circumstantially, you'll feel compelled to do something, and it comes from these impressions. Actually, the yogis are more afraid of the pleasure samskars, Patanjali says. And they're so sensitive to what kinds of impressions they take in that one of the commentators on the Yoga Sutra, Vyasadeva, says, they're as sensitive as an eyeball. And then he explains what he means by that. Your eye is so sensitive that if you take a very tiny little hair and you put it on your eyeball, you'll be very disturbed. If you put it anywhere else on your body, you won't be disturbed. But the yogi becomes so aware of the fact that I'm taking in impressions from the outside world, and then there are consequences from those, that it means they know from this there will be repercussions, a sequence of things that unfold. So they're very much aware of it. We do have a preponderance of experiences in this world that are painful. That's perhaps why you're seeing more pain samskars than pleasure samskars. And the reason that the yogis are a little more wary of the pleasure samskars, called hladini samskars, is because they know they're harder to give up. Once you experience some pleasure through the senses in the world, then I become more attached to it, and I want to have that again and again. And then it strengthens that attachment, even to the point of addiction. And when I'm not even getting anything from it anymore, I'm still attached to it because I have that samskar in my mind. So we're going to talk about how to overwrite the samskars, how to weaken the negative samskars, and how to replace them with positive samskars through the practice of bhakti. In just a minute. Good questions. Mm-hmm. Mara, anything else? Reflections or questions?
Rukmini Devi asked you to please repeat the 5 kleshas.
Certainly. I kind of whizzed by them, didn't I? So the 5 kleshas are as follows. The first one's called avidya. So vidya means knowledge, and avidya means the opposite of knowledge, of knowing things properly. And what's included in that, for those who are keeping score at home, accepting the impermanent to be permanent. So this body is impermanent, true or false?
True.
Thank you, Kaustuba. But oftentimes I consider, this is me, and perhaps I'll stay here forever somehow or other. Accepting the impure to be pure, accepting pain to be happiness, accepting the non-self to be self. And the next is called ego, or ahankar. Aham means I, and kara means the actor. Or you can think of it in terms of the car example I gave. Aham means I, and kar means I am my car. I identify with my car. Even this body, it's a car, but I identify with it, ahankar. Then the other 3, Rukmini, are raga, which means attraction to certain objects. And then the next one is called dvesha, or aversion to certain objects. And the last is the most fascinating of all. It's called abhiniveshita, or clinging to life. So I'll just give a couple of points about raga and dvesha. Raga means attachment to the world, and dvesha means aversion. So they're two sides of the same coin. And the reason they're brought up under the level of kleshas is because I have these attachments and aversions due to my previous experiences. And I am compelled towards and attracted to certain things because of my past experiences. And for the same reason, I am averse to certain kinds of activities or substances or people because of my previous impressions. And this is what Patanjali describes as karma. Karma means that I'm being pushed to go in a certain direction. And I may think it's because of my personal choice, but it's not actually, because the criterion through which I'm making my decisions is coming from this compelling force, which are my previous impressions. And until I develop what's called vivek, or discrimination, the witnesshood I'm talking about, to be able to take a perspective and see the difference between myself and these pushings coming from the mind and senses, until I have that, then I don't have freedom of choice. And the last one, abhiniveshita, which I describe as fascinating because it's the most pervasive and difficult of all the samskars, and it means clinging to life. So Patanjali describes how, as eternal beings, we have nothing to do with the material body, yet we're taking bodies one after another. And let me just say why we're taking bodies one after another according to the wisdom texts. When we develop these samskars in our mind, they make a deep impression. And we have a predisposition to act in certain ways, as I just described. Now, remember how I gave that example about the impressions of your feet on the beach in the wet sand? So now I want you to, for a second, to imagine that one of those impressions, you make a deep impression with your foot on the sand, and then you fill it with plaster of Paris and make a mold. Is everyone familiar with plaster of Paris and how to make a mold? Okay, so you make a mold and then you pull it out, and then let's just say it's a hollow mold, and then if you fill it up with something, then you have pretty much an exact replica of that impression with all its dimensions. So what Patanjali says is, as we make impressions on the subtle level, as we develop impressions in our mind in the subtle level, they become the molds for our next life, and material nature basically fills in those molds. So I'm projecting myself into my next life. This is reincarnation, literally. Reincarnate means I'm getting new flesh. I'm turning it over again. Where does it start? The place everything starts, on the subtle level, and then is manifest on the gross level. So now what we get here is what we have developed through our chitta, because of our association and our practices, that becomes manifest literally in a material form. So every time I get one of these forms, then I'm forced to give it up. What's that called?
Death.
Thank you, Kashtubha Prabhu. And
Pleasant
so
reminder.
this death is what I like to say, the most radical thing you can possibly do in this life. It's the most awkward, it's perhaps disturbing of all activities, and that's why everyone tries to avoid it. People avoid talking about it, thinking about it. Try going to Thanksgiving with your family, and they say, well, what do you want to talk about? It's like, I know, let's talk about death. Everyone will be, where'd you come from? It's not the foremost on people's list to talk about. And Patanjali said there's a reason for this, because it's a samskar that we have from many, many lifetimes of leaving various bodies behind. And it's so disturbing to us that we'd rather not think about it at all. And therefore, our preoccupation in this life really is to not die. I don't want that to happen again. But I just don't know how to stop it. I don't know how to reverse the process, actually. So I try through cryogenics, or maybe through really good, expensive cosmetics, or, you know, any way that I possibly can. But not the least of which is just avoiding the subject altogether, and maybe just scrolling until, you know, I have my new body somewhere. So those are the five what are called kleshas of the mind. Or klesha comes the root word misery. It's what causes the mental anguish. Those five conditions of the mind. Okay.
Can I ask a question, Prabhu?
Yeah, please.
I don't want to throw you off your schedule here, or I want to make sure you can cover your material, or come back for part 2. That would be welcome as well, if it need be. So you kind of introduced this idea of becoming a witness, which, at least the way that you introduced us to it, it had to do with slowing down, trying to notice maybe what's slipping past us all the time, a kind of awareness that we lose touch with because the world is moving us with our responsibilities and our desires and our fears and so on. We're constantly moving. We're not slowing down. And so even what should be the most obvious thing to us, you know, like, hey, I'm not this body. I can watch this body. I'm not this mind. I can watch this mind. I'm something else. That's like an essential, fundamental kind of state of mind that we need to cultivate, we need to develop in order to reach this fourth dimension that you're going to bring us to. Would that be a reasonable summary of what you're saying?
Yeah, although that's not my final thesis. I just,
right.
We just stopped there for a second just to
Yes.
notice, but yes.
So my question was then, beyond what you just took us through, like sitting down and breathing and bringing our mind to our feet and to our, you know, to different parts of the body, et cetera. I get the value of that. Is there any tip or two or so that you could get us to help us understand how I can really cultivate that in my day-to-day life? Or is that going to be part of what you reveal later on?
What a perfect segue.
Okay.
You're so intuitive. Yes,
Right.
absolutely. And that's what we're always hankering for when we hear such things, theoretical things like, well, how does that have to do with me and how do I deal with it?
Yeah.
In fact, I was just reading in the Srimad Bhagavatam recently when Devahuti, the mother of Kapila Dev, in the 3rd canto says that, well, I'm sick and tired of the senses and the way I'm being pushed around by them, but it seems impossible to separate myself from the mind because I seem to be one with it.
Yeah.
So this is really a valid question. And fortunately, there are some very, very practical answers.
Please share those. Thank you.
Okay. So one thing that I talked about today so far was identity. I really wanted to distinguish between ourself and our body and to sort of catalog the difference between the material energies and how they evolve and how the body and mind are actually part of the external universe and how we are categorically different as observers. That goes to identity. Then I talked about witnesshood and how that's one way in which you can have a glimpse at any time that you wish of the difference between your body and self. And it doesn't take a lot of strain. You can have a look there. But how do we actually implement it into daily life? And how might we overcome the very strong impressions that are already there within the mind and come to a point where we feel those impressions weakening and on the other side, the inclination towards spiritual practices strengthening. So the third part of this presentation is about the channel. There is a channel to the fourth dimension. What is the fourth dimension? It is a realm that is beyond what I described. It's the cosmic machinery of this world that's there within our body. The world of inert matter, where there's sensory attraction sort of built in that causes us problems. There's duality. It's described in the scriptures to be a kind of slumber that we are in that causes us to bounce through different lifetimes, birth, death, old age, disease. We become implicated in illusory paradigms and structures. We have the limits of reason, so we can't really feel from the heart, and self-imposed limits from the mind, and so forth. And there are dedicated philosophies that say, actually, there's physicalism, which is the doctrine that the real world consists simply of the physical world. There's nothing else. But the fourth dimension is an absolute plane. It's the causal source, or the original plane of reality that's transphenomenal. I like the trans words, transphenomenal and transcosmic. It's actually beyond physicalism. It's beyond the physical, metaphysical. It's a superior nature. And so the channel comes through the process of bhakti yoga. And what's one of the aspects for developing this channel that is most emphasized is the avatar. An avatar literally means one who comes from a higher dimension to a lower dimension, and then makes for us a channel through which we can connect to that higher dimension. In general, the higher dimension is our home. It's where we feel happiness. The dimension that I'm in now is fraught with all the kleshas, or the miseries that I described before, because I'm wholly incompatible with this place. So how to make the channel? Through connecting with avatar. So I need help coming from a higher level, from that higher dimension to the lower level. And here are three fundamental practices, daily practices, through which one can come in contact with the avatar very substantially and in a practical way. Okay, so let me describe the way this process works, partly through the terminology of algorithm. An algorithm is a process of set of rules to be followed in calculations or other problem-solving operations. So if you have a bad algorithm, you're going to get failure and distress. And if you have a good algorithm, you're going to get progress and happiness. And one of my favorite speakers, Jim Rohn, used to say, an apple a day, and then you fill in the rest. Keeps the doctor away. Thank you. Zenaida? Yeah. Okay, and how about a Hershey bar a day? Not so much as apple a day. Different algorithm, different results, right? So Patanjali talks about overwriting the samskars. Those who do computer programming, write code, know that there are codes. You can overwrite codes. So the samskars in our mind are like codes, and we can amend them by bringing in new algorithms. Here are the
Looks like Vaisesika froze up on us a bit. Am I the only one?
No.
Okay. Well, hopefully he'll be back in
Oh
a second.
no, it was such a good part of the lecture too.
Let me give him a quick call and make sure that he knows. Okay, so he's trying. He's going to keep trying, and if it doesn't work, then he'll come back for part 2. But yeah, you know, people maybe Carlos Saint could elaborate on what Vaisesika Das has presented so far. I mean, I don't know. Suppose maybe I could take any questions if people have any questions.
Steve DeSimone asked if the technique we practiced earlier parallels that of Ramana Maharishi's self-inquiry.
Ramana Maharshi. You know, I've never really read Ramana Maharshi's books, but, you know, I can pretty much understand where he's coming from. And I think these techniques, you know, they have a wide kind of acceptance in yoga. Ramana Maharshi is kind of from a different school than the Srimad Bhagavatam. But these, there's a lot of the same fundamental certainly concepts and maybe even practices, you know. So a practice wherein one consciously tries to become an observer, tries to distinguish between themself and matter, between themself and the mind, between themself and the body. That's fundamental to Ramana Maharshi. I'm sure it's fundamental to Ramana Maharshi's teachings. So to bring that into a bhakti context, I think is what he's doing right now. And it could be helpful, I find, I do find that, we depend, on the power of our attraction to Krishna, Krishna's pastimes and Krishna's qualities and Krishna's form to take the mind from illusion. Whereas someone like Ramana Maharshi, his idea is to kind of separate the self from all matter through kind of a mechanical process. And that's kind of what Vaisesika Prabhu is kind of providing. Here's a mechanical way to distance yourself from the body and mind. And although it's not I would say not the most common of the bhakti types of practices, I think it's valuable for us, So yeah, same kind of thing, I think. We have some from, go.
Yeah, sorry. Laura Rubino asks, is there a dimension higher than the fourth that we can access? How many dimensions are there?
Well, I think, I believe that what he's working towards is by the fourth dimension, he's speaking about the spiritual realm. And so you could just say the spiritual realm is the fourth dimension, but within that fourth dimension, there are many different realms. I believe, we're in the Purushottam Mas now, and I'm getting ready because Kartik is next. And I always like to do something special for Kartik. So I was thinking of reading a book called the Brihad Bhagavatamrita, which I'm somewhat familiar with, but I've actually never read the whole way through. And I've owned it for a long time. And that's a book that deals with one soul's, journey through all, through the material realm, from the earth up through the heavens, and then into the various levels of the spiritual realm. So if the spiritual realm is that fourth dimension, then in one sense, there's many sub-dimensions within that dimension. And each one of them with increasing intimacy and how one relates to God.
Thanks. Philly Chris asks, Makeover Monday is very popular with the Patreon community. What are your sadhana recommendations for someone just coming to Bhakti?
It depends on who they are and how much free time they have and so on. But I would say that fundamentals would be that it would combine certainly daily hearing. I love the idea of listening to Wisdom of the Sages daily because I think it's an easy way in. I love the idea of a chapter a day of the Bhagavad Gita, maybe just the verses, and dipping into one or two commentaries. I think that's a great way. It doesn't take very long at all. But, if you spend that 15, 20 minutes, half an hour reading Bhagavad Gita, I think that's real solid. And I think people find chanting for a brand new person, they may or may not connect with it. Some people really connect with it right off the bat. Some people it takes a little longer. I remember when Jiva was first getting involved in it, at first I was like, I don't really get this chanting thing, But as you read more and you get into more, then you can eventually kind of get set on like the role that it plays and your expectations of what it's going to deliver and the patience that it's going to take and so on. But I would recommend a little steady chanting, even if it's 1 round or 2 rounds of Mahamantra. Those would be kind of, hearing and chanting are the fundamentals. If you live in a place where you can do kirtan with people on a regular basis, I would try to work that into a weekly schedule if possible, something like that. And, for different people, this won't, due to their living conditions, who they live with and or what they're eating, how they've put the food that they eat and how that relates to their spiritual practice. Different people are going to approach that differently, but the idea of trying to follow strictly vegetarianism and seeing your food, preparing it as an offering and only eating food that is offered, also really important. So if one can offer their food with devotion, if one can chant a little bit, read a little bit, hear a little bit every day, I think those are good fundamentals to start with.
Thanks. I believe Vaisesika Prabhu is back now.
All right.
Yeah, but I was getting more out of Kashtuba.
Come on. All right, Prabhu. So, yeah, we were thinking about, I believe we're thinking about going till about 1:15 originally, correct?
Sure.
And so if you can, I guess we're all trying to squeeze a part two out of you at this point. We can,
Here it comes after
but,
the intermission.
okay. So if it fits into this, great. And if it doesn't,
Sure.
we'd love to have you back either way.
Really, there's three practical parts, and I heard you talking about it when I came back in.
Okay.
And this is hearing from the Shastra. So Shastra is an interesting word in Sanskrit. It really refers to scriptures, bhakti scriptures, wisdom literatures. And these are where, they're describing the transphysical, transmental wisdom. It's beyond the mind. And so beyond even psychology. And Shastra has two pronunciations. You can say Shastra, try that, Shastra. Or you can say Shastra, Shastra. So there's a long A, Shastra, and a short A, Shastra. So when you say with a long A, Shastra, it means the wisdom literatures. And Shastra means a sword or a weapon. So there's a way in which if you take to Shastra and you inform yourself, you edify yourself, fortify yourself through Shastra, through hearing from these wisdom literatures, then you're not subjected to Shastra, which means the pains of life, the way in which I make wrong turns and because of it, I have to suffer and so forth. And as I heard Kaustubha Prabhu describing, hearing from these Shastras every day, like Bhagavad Gita is a famous one, and the Upanishads, my favorite is the Shriya Upanishad, because my spiritual master translated it, and just hearing the commonsensical wisdom. For instance, in these codes written, these algorithms given in the Shriya Upanishad, there's a Sanskrit verse says, Anyad evahur sambhavat, anyad ahura sambhavat, iti shushrumadhiranam yenas tadvijjakshade, which means that wise people know the difference between putting their attention and heart into things that are temporary and those things that are everlasting. And there's a huge difference when you invest in those two bipolar opposites. And so the implication is be wise, be smart about it, see where you're putting your attention. And I find personally every day, and I advise, everyone in our community, don't go out in the world and try to face it without first taking in the algorithm of the Bhagavad Gita or the Upanishads, because it's nothing to mess with, the world. It's too complicated. There's too many twists and turns. There's too many ways in which we get assaulted by our environment, that unless you're actually fortified by this algorithm of the Shastra that goes into the mind and then becomes a directing principle, then you'll be overcome. So that's the first one, and Patanjali recommends it, and it's widely recommended throughout the wisdom literatures, Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam. The second one is called japa meditation. It's a repetition of sacred syllables that deliver the mind from the clutter and reveal the channel to the fourth dimension. So here's a very important concept. I mentioned avatar. The mantra and the avatar are one. So when you say the names in the mantra, it actually is an avatar. They're personal. The avatar will appear because of your sincere repetition of the mantra itself, and then it opens for you a path to the fourth dimension. That's what the avatar does. And just to comment on the power of sound, which is something I like to do a lot, think about the way sound reveals in this world. For instance, I read an article about heart doctors and how they use stethoscopes. Isn't it the quintessential view of a doctor? I mean, even if it's a fake doctor on the news selling some, fix-it-all medicine or something like that, he or she always has a stethoscope around it. That's become really the sign, the emblem of a doctor. So what is that stethoscope? Actually very revealing that heart doctors listen very carefully to the heart, and they can hear the music of the heart, and they can tell with the trained ear what's going on in there, and very subtle detail from hearing. And what about ultrasound? If there's, for instance, a baby growing in a woman's belly, you go and you get ultrasound, and you can actually see the form of the baby inside. It's something you can't see with your naked eyes. Or how about sonar? Sonar, you can't see what's in the ocean, but when you use sound, it goes in, it ascertains what's there, the depth, the form, and it brings it back and it reveals. And similarly, mantra. I cannot see my spiritual self right now, or the source of myself. But when I use mantra, then it shines a light, and I can actually see my transrational, non-neural, non-temporal nature beyond the self. And this realization grows as I continue doing japa, self-study through chanting the mantra. And then finally, the third aspect mentioned by the wisdom literatures, Patanjali says this will help weaken those negative samskars, and then you can replace them with these positive samskars like mantra, meditation, and shastra, and that's by performing karma yoga. It means enlightened engagement with the world. So one of the ways in which to do that is through selfless service, or dedication of the fruits of your work to a higher cause. And when you change the motive for which you're working, you naturally start to develop a sense of self, of your higher self. Because the way that I'm connected to the world is by karma, and that's what's called reward-seeking activity. I'm moving about the world, but I'm reward seeking. I want something in return. And when I do that, it connects me so tightly to the external world that I can't see myself. I can't see beyond the disturbances caused by that within my mind. So there are various motivations for working and moving in the world. As you were saying before, Kaustuba, what about, I'm walking around, I'm moving, I'm walking here. So here are the various levels of motivation for moving in the world. One is fear. That's the lowest of all. And in that category is debt also. I'm in debt, so I got to move. I got to work. I got to pay back the debt. That's also karma. I enjoyed before, now I got to pay it back. So I'm fearful. I can't stop. That's the lowest motivation for moving and working in the world. The next is prospect. That's reward seeking. What am I going to get in return for this? And we all know, even on a visceral level, when you interact with somebody, they're doing service for you, but they want something in return. It's not really service. It's something that is tit for tat. And the feeling isn't the same. Above that, motivation is duty. I'm doing it for a higher reason. That's actually starting to touch the metaphysical level. I'm doing my duty, not because I'm in debt, not because I want something in return, because it's the right thing to do. That's dharma. But higher than all of them is love. I'm working out of gratitude. Starts with gratitude. I'm working out of appreciation, out of gratitude that I'm connected and being maintained by a higher power. And I'm giving back to that source, that original conscious source that's love personified, that's maintaining me and every other aspect of the universe. And when I work in that mode, I naturally become aware of my higher self. And Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita gives this analogy. Brahmanyadaya karmani sangham tyakva karotiya dipyatena sapapena padma patram ivambasa. So a lotus is called a padmaja. And ja means to be born, and padma means mud. So a lotus, the most beautiful flower I've ever seen, and I see them in Osaka when I go to Japan. Every year there's a botanical gardens, and they're just beautiful, radiant. They have about 42 different kinds, exactly 42 different kinds of lotus flowers. And I go spend a little time with each one of them and remember this verse. The lotus is born out of mud at the bottom of the pond, and it grows to the top. And although it's situated in the water, it's never touched by the water. Because of its nature, the nature of the lotus is it has some kind of film on the outside, and you can see it for yourself. Even as the water splashes on it, it doesn't get wet. It's almost otherworldly to watch the lotus, and that's why Krishna gives us this example. So when I change my motivation for work in the world towards selfless service, then I start to see my higher self. I start to understand how I'm being maintained by a higher power, my original conscious source. And there's a vast difference between moving in the world for prospect or fear from selfless service. It may look the same, just like if you see two copper wires sitting there. One of them is electrified and the other one isn't. And you may say, well, they're both just copper wires. But if you touch them, you'll know, and I don't recommend, but if you touch them, you'll notice the difference. So those who transfer their intentions to selfless service, this karma yoga, I'm working for a different intention in the world, they rise above the fetters of the mind and the material world. And they become a conduit for others, just like that copper wire. When you meet somebody who's working for a higher cause, you'll notice that you start to feel electrified. You start to feel, oh, yeah, I want to do better myself. So there are three ways in which Patanjali says you can bundle these together very easily in your life. And even if you do a tiny bit every day, the first one is swadhyaya, read something from the wisdom literatures, because it's an algorithm that comes from a trans-mental place. It's not from this world, and you have to read it to feel it for yourself. It reorganizes the samskars. It overwrites them. It overwrites the negative samskars, the bad habits that lock me into this pattern that I can't get out of on my own, that the literature, wisdom literature helps. The next is japa. Take some time to sit and examine yourself. First of all, can I sit? Second, and that's interesting, if I can't, why? Second of all, is japa. I'm repeating these sacred mantras. Can I just listen for a little while? And you start to discover all kinds of things about yourself, just as when you use ultrasound, you see inside something. So the japa reveals that. And the third is karma yoga. If you can't do it all the time, do it as much as you can. Start a little bit. Dedicate some of the fruits of your work to a higher cause. And you'll notice, I mean, the first thing I always notice when I give away the fruit of my work is that I didn't die. That's a revelation, because the mind says, you give this away, you won't survive. But there's a different way that we survive in this world, and it has nothing to do with my own work. And we start to realize that when we start to give away, when we start to work for a higher cause. So those are the three, and we still have a couple minutes left. So let's just see if there's any questions or reflections.
There's a question from Vibhu Sharma. He asks, how should one take his mind away from himself and focus on the Maha Mantra?
Very interesting question, actually. In fact, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the quintessential literature on bhakti, there's a story about 4 Kumaras. They're these saints who are babies, actually. They walk around. They're saints who didn't want to grow up. I guess that's where Peter Pan came from. And they go in various places and meet people and enlighten them and so forth. And in one of the stories about the 4 Kumaras, they're asking a question, a similar question about how to detach oneself from the world. And they meet one of the incarnations of Krishna called Hamsa, who comes almost comically in the form of a swan and begins to speak to them. And in that form, as a swan, he gives them this advice. We're not trying to detach the mind from the world, because that's almost impossible, because the two of them are similar. It's the same energy, as I described before. What we're trying to do actually is detach ourself from our mind, as we did in the beginning by being a witness and saying, hey, I'm watching my mind, I'm not my mind. So maybe repeat the question, because I interrupted myself.
Yeah. How should one take his mind away from himself and focus on the Maha Mantra?
Oh, well, by practice. And, let me introduce you to a couple of words, the word of practice, which is methodology plus discipline. Methodology plus discipline is practice. And methodology comes from Greek methodos, pursuit of knowledge. And meta means development, and hodos means a way to develop. And then if you have discipline, which means controlled behavior. So the way to do that is just practice. With any kind of discipline or where you're trying to control the way your body works or the way your mind works, you have to start wherever you can, even with one tiny molecule of practice. And if you do it regularly, then it'll start to grow in your life. I've noticed that being on lockdown, because I feel like it's Groundhog Day, and every day I'm waking up and starting over again. You feel like that too. So that, like, what are you going to do today, buddy? Are you going to follow the practice, or are you going to go off the rails? And I'm like, I'm watching you, so, and when you do go off, then you just have to come back. So keep bringing yourself back to the center. Balance isn't about always being still. It's about knowing where the center is. And that's one of the powers of reading every day, is that helps to center you and go, oh, right, that's what I'm aiming for, and keep pulling back. And then you get some otherworldly help from the mantra also, because it's an avatar.
There's another question here. Let's see. Chris asks, can you elaborate on svadhyaya? What should be our strategy, guidelines for beginners?
So the first thing I recommend is when you wake up in the morning, start with a mantra. First thing, as soon as you open your eyes, say a mantra. If you're used to chanting the Maha Mantra, you can, as soon as you become conscious, even before you open your eyes, say the mantra, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And have a set program. So as soon as you step out of the bed, that you have at least 5 things in a row that you do automatically to get you going in the right direction. That helps. So one of the things is that I offer some, besides the Maha Mantra, I say some affirmations that I wrote myself. I can share them with you if you like. I'll give them to Kashtuba. You could look at them. You can try those. And then I cleanse myself, touching water, so forth, and get clean. And then I start my process of swadhyaya. So one thing that I do is I have the book out the night before that I'm going to read from, and I mark it. I'll just give you an example. This is Srimad Bhagavatam. So this is what I'm studying now. And you might, I don't know if you can see, but inside I have these little tags. One of them has an arrow on it, and the other one has a number. That number is 41. So you could put any number you like, but I put 41 because I read 41 pages every morning. So I start off by moving the tag 41 pages forward, and then I have a target to shoot for. And the reason it's 41 is because I know once a year I finish this whole book by reading 41 pages a day. So having targets for your mind to shoot for really helps in doing that. And then doing a little bit of japa. So get a sacred place or a place where you can sit comfortably and not be disturbed. I also recommend, if you have anybody else living with you, get a do not disturb sign. It's one of the most deliberate things you can do to help your spiritual practice, is put up a do not disturb sign, and everyone will take it seriously. And then also anything with an on-off switch, turn it off. Even if you have your phone on, like you just turn it upside down, like here's phone, you put it upside down, it's still calling to you somehow. So there's something very deliberate about turning everything off. So you're just with the mantra. And then when you do mantra, the best advice I can give for starting is be aware that you're chanting. And just keep asking yourself that question as you chant your japa. Say, am I aware that I'm chanting right now? Because it's wholly possible to chant and be thinking about doing your taxes or going shopping, or, I didn't write somebody back. Just keep coming back. Am I aware that I'm chanting? And if you do that, then the mantra as the avatar, it has its own power. It's just like if you're in a hole, like you fall down into a blind well and someone hands you a rope. You have to at least grab onto the rope. You can't say, well, can't you just pull me up? Say, yeah, I gave you the rope, now grab on. So when we use our attention on the mantra, that's what pulls us out. The avatar will give us a hand, but we have to do a little bit of work on that side. There it is. Thank you very much, Kaustubha Prabhu, for having me. Mara, thank you very much for assisting on everything and making it all work. Thank you, everybody, for joining and for your kind attention. It was really powerful, your presence. I could see all of you, and I could feel such a high level of attention in all of you that's what inspired me to keep going at the paltry level that I was able to muster. And sorry about the interruption today. I have no idea why that internet went out, but that's the way it goes.
Vaisesika Prabhu, thank you so much for spending this time with us. Our community is kind of falling in love with you, so we're going to be coming back to you and trying to beg and steal more of your time from you in the future.
Lucky for me, that's all I can say.
And if I could share one last thing with you that I found on the chat board here, because I know this is the kind of thing that you live for, but this is coming from Charlie McKinnon. And he said, Krishna miracle alert. Last week or the last week or so, I've been thinking about taking the leap and getting my own set of the Srimad Bhagavatam. But it's a little out of my price range at the moment. So I kind of set the idea aside and thought to myself, I just need to be patient and keep studying, and it will come to me when I'm ready for it. Fast forward to today. I was parked downtown, and just as I'm getting into my car, I look up and I see a used bookstore. I think to myself, maybe I will just check and see if there are any books by Prabhupada. I walked in and asked where the Eastern philosophy section was, and there, boom, Krishna Miracle. Second canto, part 1 by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, the exact book that we are currently working through on Wisdom of the Sages. What are the chances? Anyway, not the full set, but just what I needed at the moment. So beautiful.
Wow, that's amazing. Really amazing. And I think that if you need help with a set, we can give you, we can make some facility to subsidize to whatever degree you need to get you a set.
Okay, miracle
I
number
wouldn't
2.
want you to go without.
Okay, so in that case, he could reach out to you by.
You can reach out and I'll make an arrangement.
Okay, and why don't we plug where people can reach out to you again too? It's vaiseshigadasa.com. Is that right?
That's right. I have vaiseshigadasa.com. Okay. And I also have fanthespark.com, and I'm also on Facebook.
Okay.
Under Vaisesika Dasa, and also under Fan the Spark.
Okay.
The Vaisesika Dasa is a little more tailored towards, I give corporate talks every week, and it's more tailored for the Intel and Google audiences. And then the other one, Fan the Spark, it's for those who are a little more familiar with the tradition. But, you can check them out and see which one the water feels better in, and Great. And also, you can get in touch with me through then if you have any more questions.
Great. Charlie, don't be shy. He wants you to have a set.
That's right. That's what I live for, as Coach Duma knows.
Thank you again. Thank you, everybody, for coming and spending this time.
What a pleasure. Rukmini, my obeisances. Thank you very much, everybody.
Rukmini, thank you so much for coming.
Keep up the great work.
Thank you, Prabhu. And I'll see you all in the morning. Thank you again. Mary will post this soon, and you can share it with your friends on Patreon if you'd like to. Thank you.